On a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed are you feeling right now? Is that good or bad? Actually, it's not for me to judge because it's such a personal feeling and my threshold and triggers for stress can be very different from yours. And some stress, for example, when we're being pushed out of our comfort zone and growing as a leader, can be good for us and our growth. I'm Lee Griffith, a communication strategist, executive coach and champion of leaders who do things differently and reject the old school stereotypes. In the Leaders with Impact podcast, I'm here to help you get clear on your strategy, implement some self-leadership and connect with those you serve through your communication so that you can deliver improved organisational performance, engagement and reputation. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review over on Apple Podcasts. Now, I've had many a moment in my career where I've experienced periods of stress and anxiety, sometimes real, sometimes perceived, sometimes to the point where actually I felt really unwell. And I suppose what I've learned from my years of working in corporate and the work I do now with my clients is that it's actually not about the stress per se, but how we deal with it and respond to it as individuals. And that's more about us bringing a whole load of self-awareness to our self-leadership, which is something that I tackle head on through the coaching and strategy days I hold, which, by the way, if you think your self-leadership needs some TLC, head over to sundayskies.com and book a free consultation call with me. In today's episode, I got the chance to chat with anxiety coach Ashleigh Frater. Ashleigh is trained in psychology and counselling, and she helps female leaders to safely process their anxiety and stress so that they can perform at their best. We talk about how anxiety can impact leaders and the knock-on effects for their teams and organisations. We also tackle the resilience issue, and we explore what leaders can do to help themselves and others. Enjoy. So I'm delighted to welcome Ashleigh Frater to the Leaders with Impact podcast this week. Hi, Ashleigh. How are you today?
I'm so good. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As we were talking briefly before I hit record, I think this is one of those topic areas that can sometimes, in the old school approach to leadership, that it's a topic that's you've just got to kind of grin and bear through it, and you shouldn't really lean into that emotional side of your being. So I was really keen that we covered and tackled that head on in today's discussion. So for those who don't know, you're an anxiety coach. Is that the best way to describe you?
Yes, definitely an anxiety coach.
Excellent. And so I suppose to start, anxiety is probably one of those words where it does mean different things to different people. So people often say that, I say this all the time, I'm feeling anxious about something or the other, but it could be a bit like stress, I suppose. It can be a bit overused, perhaps. So what would you, in your professional capacity, describe anxiety as?
Well, you speaking about stress and then speaking about anxiety and how people use it quite interchangeably, it's linked, heavily linked. So really, anxiety is the result of unmanaged stress. So most of the time, you come into a environment, something happens, there's a trigger, an event happens, you see something in memory, something happens, and you have a stress response, technically. So it's something that's outside of your normal. So your body is seeing this as something to pay attention to. So you feel a little bit, your attention is now on that thing, whatever that is. And so you feel stressed. So your body is flooded with cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And averagely, once your body's flooded with that, it's signaling to you to rest. At some point, you are meant to take a rest. You're meant to stop, take a step back, react in that way and respond to the stress hormone. But if we don't, and we just allow the stress levels to continue to rise and the cortisol levels to continue to increase, the body then moves into anxiety. So that's when stress, when it hasn't been dealt with or it hasn't been responded to in a way of resting or pausing, it then moves into anxiety. And where anxiety is, again, stress, I like to call it stress trapped in the body.
Right,
That's
right.
how I like to describe it, because most of the times when you talk about, you're speaking about people use anxiety quite often, it's like, to me, it reminds you of the word value. Value is a very overused word. Like, you got to share value, you got to give value. Like, what does value mean? Like, it means very different things to different people. So anxiety is also used quite a lot. Like, I'm feeling anxious, but a lot of the time, and the thing that stays the same is that it's I'm feeling. So it's usually a feeling in the body. Like, I'm feeling anxious, right? I'm feeling anxiety right now, or those kind of terminology. But the first part tells you, which is a bit of NLP, that it's the feeling, it's the body part that is a good signal to where the stress is currently trapped.
Right. So anxiety almost is the physical manifestation or symptom of stress not being dealt with.
Yeah, 100%.
Fascinating. Now,
Yeah.
see, I've already learnt something, because I had just always assumed that they are different, related but unrelated things. So it's the same said for words like when people say, "Oh, I suffer burnout," or even when they talk about things like, I feel like I've got low self-esteem and low confidence. Are they all similar in the same kind of family, or are they different?
I mean, I would say, so burnout is there's different levels of burnout. Like, there's different levels of stress, there's different levels of anxiety, let's put it like that. But burnout, I see it as the quite far end of the spectrum. Like, when you're burnt out,
Right.
you know, like, that's
Yeah.
when stress is at its peak, and you are forced to rest most of the time. Like, when people are at their, severe levels, or the really, really high levels of burnout. And again, burnout is a mixture of things, but averagely, it's just unmanaged emotion that then manifests in you doing averagely too much than the capacity that you have to give. And then it therefore manifests physically within your body. So it can again manifest into anxiety at some point. I'm sure people that get to levels of burnout have felt anxious, because again, stress unmanaged in the body manifests as anxiety, and then just ramps it up. So sometimes people do, have burnout and also levels of depression, as well as, panic attacks and things like that. They, depending on the different circumstances and the environments, and, naturally the personality and the person itself, like their lifestyle, nutrition. It's a full circle thing. It's like not just one isolated thing that, relates to someone being burnt out. It's a collection of things that ultimately, I believe, comes down to unmanaged emotion. Because at some point there was disappointment, maybe there was unappreciation, maybe there was a lot of doubt. And when we don't pay attention to those emotions, we try to outrun them by doing things, by covering them up, by numbing them. And when you do all of those things, those emotions don't go away. In fact, they grow a lot more stronger. They have a lot more strength. They transition into more aggressive emotion, which could come out in anger, in frustration. You know what I mean? So you can see now it's starting to increase. The temperature starts to increase. The more and more things happen, things build up. And people, if it's like a volcano, they blow their top, they burn out. They're at the high level, whatever that mental health condition becomes, that's when they're at their peak.
Yeah. I was, as you were talking, and you used the analogy of volcano and temperature, and I had this almost a Richter scale. So you've got a Richter scale of stress, and depending on how well you're managing it, you go through different levels of, and then the end is the kind of catastrophic ending of if you don't deal with it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Gosh. So where does anxiety come from? Is it something that is I suppose, artificially produced after being triggered by something in your life? Or is it something that's in the fabric of your makeup and your constitution, and you kind of, you have it from birth and you're likely, therefore, it's likely to manifest? Is it something that everyone gets, or only certain types of people?
The thing is, every human being experiences anxiety at some point, because we all experience stress. Because not all stress is bad also. Like, that's a good thing to point out. Like, you can go to the gym and you'll put your body under stress, but that's not necessarily a bad stress, because you know the end result. You know, you're kind of doing it intentionally because it's going to hurt, it's going to be uncomfortable, but you know the end result you're looking for. However, you can cross over in, well, you're trying to avoid something by going to the gym and doing too much and putting your body under immense level of stress because you're trying to outrun doubt or some negative emotion that you don't want to feel. You know what I mean? So it can be a bit of a fine line. So firstly, stress, you know, it's a human being thing. Anxiety is something that everybody experiences. And when we're speaking about anxiety, there is different levels of anxiety. So in a sense of, you can have anxiety that then becomes a medical condition. And that's a completely different ballgame, because once it becomes a medical condition, your biochemistry has changed. So it becomes a physical change in the brain, and the different hormone levels and that are increased and decreased, and requires, you know, medication to be able to help, you know, balance you out technically. So that's quite different. But I don't feel, and I don't believe that people are born like babies. They're not born with like an anxiety disorder. Like,
No.
do you know what I mean? It can be environmental. So like, when you are a child and there's certain things that have happened in your childhood, they can heavily, as you know, childhood trauma is a big thing. Like, it's a very well-known thing now. Everybody's speaking about it, everyone's diving into it. A lot of childhood trauma is coming up in adulthood. And people have absolutely no idea things that have happened that affected them from when they were 5, 6, even younger, when they're 40, 50, 60. Do you know what I mean? So things that happen in your childhood can heavily influence and affect how your emotions are, how you emotionally regulate yourself, how you respond to things, hence like triggers and things like that, how you're responding or reacting to things, and therefore how you know, manage your stress. And so anxiety can be something that you can have from a young age. But I definitely believe that it's around the environment that you sit in, the role models, the people that you're looking at as a child, to model what you're meant to do, how you're meant to feel, how you're meant to respond to stressful situations. If you have a parent, a carer, a brother or sister that you live with, that you see regularly as a child, that has, you know, they're a bit anxious, they're a little bit more overreacting for whatever those reasons, you as a child are going to expect and have to do the same. You think, well, that's the way I should behave. So you then develop in that way, with that lens of, this is the right way to behave. Not until you get older or you run into certain situations in your life do you realize, well, this is not really working. Like, this is not helping me. This is not healthy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that anxiety is something that we're not born with as an anxiety condition. We're all born to feel anxiety because it's helping us pay attention to something. Like, stress is something that we all, even in the womb, you hear the midwife say, oh, the baby's distressed, because heart rate drops, you know, temperatures change, and the smallest change to an environment in a baby in a womb can make their heart rate increase or decrease, which therefore means it shows that there's stress within the body, even as an unborn child. So stress is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that we experience from literally the womb.
And I suppose one of the things that was going through my mind before we recorded this episode is that actually it can be so situational where how it shows up. So people have, sometimes I go, oh, I've got health anxiety because I always get nervous before I have to go, for a hospital appointment or something. People might have social anxiety and they don't like being in crowds or talking in public. And so there's lots of different things where they might not think that they are an anxious person or even stressed, but might use those types of phrases.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the things with anxiety is it's always based on something outside of you most of the time. It's the uncertainty of something. It's the lack of control of something. So even for me, like, I hate spiders. And that technically is a type of anxiety.
I'm with you there.
Arachnophobia is a type of anxiety. You know what I mean? So it's that fear of like, the spider is there. What is it going to do? Where is it going to go? Am I going to be able to see it? Do I have to touch it? Like all of the things, I can't control any of those things. Like I can't control the spider, but it's a thought of the spider that's causing me to feel anxious and very stressed about the situation. You know what I mean? So that's just like you said, social anxiety is about the people. Again, how they're going to perceive you, how if they're going to judge you. Like it's all about the external perception of how it makes you feel internally. So again, it's about anxiety is based on us. And I suppose it's generated as a feeling in our body in a way based on an external person, situation, source that we are unable to control and we're worried about it.
So what are some of the symptoms and warning signs to be aware of? Because I'm conscious, and you've made this point about not all stress is bad.
Yeah.
And there is something about, if we sit in our comfort zone where everything feels comfortable, we never progress. And I'm thinking particularly in that leadership context, you do need to stretch yourself out and feel that discomfort in order for you and your organisation to progress. So how do you pick up, I suppose, the warning signs that it's more than just pushing and stretching yourself?
I would say that, especially when it comes to leadership, I think it's all about your values. I always go down to the basics when it comes to like a coaching foundational is based on your values. What are your core values? And if you are therefore doing something that is within and aligns in your values, but is not within your comfortability, then that's fine. You're going to feel levels of stress because you're doing something that's brand new. So naturally, you're going to have to use more brain power. You're going to be a bit uncertain about something. You're going to maybe be a little bit more nervous. Those emotions are going to come up, and that's very, very natural to do. Yeah. I think when we are now operating on things that are outside of our values now, and they're conflicting, that I feel is a very different emotion. And I feel like you feel it more intensely, and you might have a lot more, thoughts that feel quite big, if that makes sense. Because like, if you're doing something that's outside your comfort zone, you're going to have that imposter syndrome a little bit, like, I shouldn't be doing this, but you still kind of do it. But you just have that like underlining feeling like, maybe I'm not the right person for this, but you're going to keep going anyway because you've committed to something, especially if you're a leader, like you're committed to something. There's probably some level of accountability around there somewhere that's keeping and holding you, accountable to what you say to keep progressing forward. But if it's something that is very is the complete opposite to what your values are. So say, for example, your values is honesty. Like honesty is a very important core value to you. And you're doing something that's very dishonest because of outside influences, because of other, maybe within the senior leadership team, they're wanting to do something that doesn't quite feel like it aligns with your honest value. And then you go along with it anyway, because, it's the collective. You go along with it, give it a go. You're going to have some level of reaction internally to be like, this does not feel right. Like it's only as a person how strong that's going to feel. And averagely, there's something that's really not right here. And you probably will say, this doesn't feel right, but I'm going to do it. Like you're probably going to say that to yourself at some point. So then to me, immediately, that's a red flag straight away to be like, there's something going against your gut, and your gut is telling you that there's something wrong. So then you go with the collective naturally and things progress. And then, you then will start to feel stressed. You're going to feel that there may be more conversations that happen, more decisions that need to be made, and you're feeling very stressed about it because you're now feeling that, well, this is not something I want to do. I don't truly believe in this. You know what I mean? And then you're starting to feel anxious because you're like, what if this happens? And what does that happen? And then how do we, troubleshoot and put this fire out if this happened? Because you're now having to preempt failure ahead of time because it's not really something that aligns with you. Really, you should have said, no, this is the other idea I have, or I can't be a part of this. But sometimes, again, that creates anxiety because you're now being separated from the pack. You're going to be different. You're going to stand out. And depending on, your confidence levels, your self-esteem, your self-worth, depends on how confident and how much courage you have to be able to say that and advocate for yourself within, this context that we're speaking of as an example. So I feel like from a leadership perspective, values is the biggest decision. I always say it's your compass. Like it tells you where you need to be going, and you can never go wrong as long as you know what they are. You can never go wrong following them. The problem comes is when you go against them and you're trying to then outrun the bad decision by doing all the other things. And that's where I see and believe that the stress and anxiety starts to kick in. And really the anxiety is there to let you know that there's something wrong.
Yeah, that's a really clear way, I suppose, to articulate the challenge when you are in, and I'm thinking specifically when you're in organisations where perhaps culturally it can feel a bit toxic and you're trying to achieve something as an organisation that, and actually, if, as you've said, if they're not aligned with the values and that all they're doing is perpetuating a poor culture, which actually has such a significant effect, not just on that individual, it has a knock-on effect and ramifications for the team, for the organisation. So it's pretty major, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. Because again, like you said, if you're you're in a leadership position, you have people you're leading. So your decisions affect other people. So people that are, your team or the wider team naturally are going to trust you as a leader and trust that you're making the right decisions that affect them as well as the whole organization, and trust that your values are truly at the core of all your decision making. And if that's then broken, then that's like a domino effect, because then that's trust is very easily broken and it's very hard to build back. Like incredibly
absolutely.
difficult to build back, especially amongst a large number of people. Like it's hard building back trust with one person, let alone like a whole team, a whole division. Like it's incredibly difficult. So I feel like, again, the best thing as a leader is know your values and make sure you stick to them and follow them as much as you possibly can. And if you do veer in the wrong direction, course correct, go back to the drawing board, go back to level 1 and be like, hey, what are my values? And where did I go wrong here? Because naturally, you're a human being. You're not going to make the right decisions all the time. And people will forgive that naturally if you are, own up to them, you're transparent, you have levels of vulnerability, which I think are incredibly important as a leader, for sure.
Yeah.
Just say that I did this wrong. And this is how I'm going to, correct it. And these are my changes. And you're just being transparent with people. People appreciate that, especially if you want to build a culture of honesty. And if honesty is your value, you have to exercise that. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So I think, it's so important. Like decision making as a leader, just make it a value-based decision.
So one of the things that I notice, and maybe it's a pattern that you see with people or managers and leaders who could be described as stressed or anxious is this need to feel like they've got to control everything around them, because that's the way they're going to manage their stress. And what they often do is create this parent-child like dynamic to stay in control. But they still struggle to make decisions, to avoid certain situations. All of that kind of stuff happens when a leader is stressed. I suppose how big a problem do you think it is in a leadership context?
I think that to be a leader, you have to know yourself. And it's fine if you're a new manager or you're in a new position and you're still trying to figure that out, but you're actively discovering yourself. Self-awareness is incredibly important for any human, but specifically humans that are leading other people, like learning and understanding, yourself. So I think that's the first thing. And then within that inquiry, you'll start to pick up, I'm a bit, apprehensive when it comes to making decisions. I do feel a little bit overwhelmed by, certain environments, certain time constraints, certain, pressures. You'll figure this out once you really go on the journey of like really starting to understand who you are, maybe as what your role was previously, and then the identity as a leader, and figuring out what you would like that to be as well. Because a lot of the time I think people just fall into positions and they kind of, wing it, which is fine. But I think if you're being proactive, then understanding the kind of leader you would like to be and then operating from that person, I think really helps. Because speaking about like the parent-child kind of dynamic when it comes to like, stress and making decisions and things like that, well, if you were able to, which I really enjoy in coaching, you have this like future self concept. And it's really powerful because you are who you are today, but you want to get somewhere, which is usually a different identity, right? A more elevated, a more calm, and whatever the attributes are of that identity. But especially from a leadership position, what kind of leader do you want to be? How does that leader speak? How does that leader make decisions? How does that leader speak to their team? How do they operate? What does their morning like? Every single detail of specifically what that leader looks like. And then, especially from the emotional perspective, it's like, what are those values, which are likely to be the same as who you are now, but, maybe more demonstrating them more in a more public way. And therefore, what emotions do you want to be generating? Because how you feel is how you make someone else feel. And if you're leading a team, then if you want them to feel empowered, then you have to feel empowered yourself. You know what I mean? And again, parent-child, it's not, I do one thing and then they have to do another. Like, no, they're watching you. So they're going to be, you have to demonstrate what it is that you also want to see. So therefore, when you actually cultivate, like, these are the kind of emotions I really want to demonstrate on a regular basis because that's the leader I want to be. When you're in a situation where you're feeling, and if again, how does that leader deal with stress? How does that leader deal with overwhelm? Nothing's perfect, but you have to be proactive and you have to think about these things. So that when you're in a situation, you have a choice. Do I respond as me now? Or do I respond as, give your leader a name, like X leader, right? Give it a good punch name, usually helps. And then you switch into a different identity and you're like, well, no, this person is going to make decisions quickly. Even if it feels uncomfortable, I'm going to make them quickly. However, if it is the wrong decision, I'm going to course correct quickly. Again, you know what I mean? So therefore, you're learning to proactively deal and respond to stress, overwhelm, the things that kind of naturally make you feel a bit unsure. And you're proactively responding to them because you've planned ahead of time. Yeah. Again, like I said, nothing is perfect. So we can naturally just be triggered by something and we react instantaneously. But then you also have time after reaction to then respond.
Yeah. I think that's really important, because there's pretty much there's very little I can think of where you can't preempt certain situations that might arise in a leadership perspective specifically. And if you think that X is a particular problem that you deal with, like decision making, you could easily do, if you create that time and space to spend that time going, right, well, what kind of decisions am I being asked to make? How have I dealt with them in the past? How would I like to deal with them in the future? And what am I going to do to start to take? So I completely agree. I think there's I can't really think of any examples where you can't prepare for something that might happen. One of the things that I suppose you talked about, that emotion and people, you're almost role modeling as a leader. So how you behave, and how, if you're experiencing stress and anxiety, your response to that, people pick up on and I suppose what that made me think of is I've seen examples where teams start feeling anxious because they're picking up on the signals of their leader who's anxious, and it's this ripple effect that goes across the team. And we often talk about leaders needing to be vulnerable and sharing their emotions and feelings, but sometimes that can trip over into the leader offloading all their worries and concerns, which can actually then, I suppose, build that sense of anxiety and stress even more in their team. So how can you start to get that balance right of being open and showing vulnerability, but not transferring responsibility, I suppose?
I think, again, self-awareness is really important. Like, I think that's just at a basic level, that it has to be a regular thing. Like, you have to be inquiring, self-evaluating constantly for yourself, so that you know when you are projecting or when you're just sharing. Like, they're two very different things. But it's all emotionally. Like, you'll know it emotionally, where you're like, maybe if something is still quite raw, something has happened and you haven't spoken about it to anyone yet, and you've been overthinking it, you're thinking about it in your head quite a bit. Maybe you're feeling a bit worried about it. And then maybe you run into like a team member, and then you're like, they ask one question, and then you're like, you just let it all out. And then afterwards you feel like that kind of like exhaling feeling. But that's when you know you've offloaded. That's the difference. Like, that's when you know, like, okay, because then you will question, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Do you know what I mean? You might have that thought afterwards, but because the initial release feels so good, know that you've offloaded on someone. Whereas if you have already kind of thought about the situation, processed it, and reached some level of a conclusion or a solution for yourself, and then you're sharing the lessons or maybe the story from now a place of processed emotion, then that's sharing. And that's you being vulnerable. That's you sharing your thoughts at the time, which is, it could have happened yesterday, but you've processed it in the day. You've reached your conclusion. You're not so emotionally attached. You have a detachment of it. And now you're just sharing. Then, and sharing the story, what happened, the lessons, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, even the challenges, like all of the kind of storytelling, basically. And then you're like, yeah, that's something that they can take away, and that's vulnerability, because most people don't share that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, they think like, well, it's none of their business. I don't want to expose myself. I don't want to be seen as weak by sharing that I had a failure or a weak moment or I struggled with something. Then, that's another situation. But if you want to be more vulnerable, it's all about how it feels, and it's all about the processing part. Because the first example I gave, that was you or that person trying to process with another person that's not trained to hear that, and they didn't ask for it. You know what I mean? You offloaded. And that is it's very unsafe, because when you offload on someone, they then take it on. And you don't know their emotional state and whether they have the emotional capacity to be able to receive the information and the emotion that comes with that. So
I've talked in other episodes and with some of the chief execs that I've interviewed, and we've talked about the importance of nurturing and being intentional in your support network, and it is exactly for those types of scenarios, so you're not offloading to the wrong people, but that you've got a trusted safe space, and that might be, you know, professional. You might have a coach, you might have a mentor, you might have a counsellor, possibly, depending on the situation. It may be peers in your organization that you know you can create that space with, but very rarely it's likely to be your team members.
But I think in order to know the difference between offloading and sharing vulnerability is really how attached you are to the story or whatever's happened. If you're very attached to it, you're going to have thoughts about what you've said afterwards, that maybe I shouldn't have said this, or maybe I did too much, or you're going to feel very uncertain and maybe a bit doubtful. But when you're just sharing, you feel empowered by it. You feel like, because you're unattached, because you've processed through the emotion and you've reached your end solution that requires nobody else other than yourself, and now you're just sharing. So it's an emotional, you know the feeling, you'll sense it in yourself, the differences, for sure.
So we've talked a lot about I suppose being tuned into the internal signals that you might experience when you're feeling stressed, and when you've gone on that scale to anxiety or worse. What can you do if you know, someone's listening to this and they are now clicking into, actually, these feelings that I've been feeling don't feel great and I need to do something about them, or they've recognized maybe behaviors in someone else that they're going, oh, this feels like, what would you recommend that someone does?
So if they're feeling a little bit off, because, you know, we all have those days or periods of time or, you know, circumstantial things that come up where you just don't feel yourself, I always say to just take some time away. And even if that's a work day, that could just be take some time away from your desk, at home, in the office, take, you know, an hour's lunch outside, give yourself perspective, give yourself, you know, a different environment to kind of think and see kind of what comes up for you. I think the other thing that I will always, always, always recommend is writing down your feelings and your thoughts specifically, because later down the line, even if you know, decide, okay, I need to speak to my GP or I need to speak to a therapist or a counselor, then, or even a coach, then the most useful thing you can give them is your diary of thoughts, like, because to help you quicker. Because if, say, you were writing for a week, or every time that you feel this, especially if it becomes quite a frequent thing, so it's like every day there's a really odd feeling, and then you write down, okay, this is what I'm currently thinking, the literal words and sentences in your brain, writing those down along with the emotion that if you can label it, and then every day it comes up or it feels triggered, then there's a pattern that you can potentially see when you see the string of thoughts over a period of time. It's a bit like the doctors. If, you know, you're complaining for a headache, they're going to ask you, well, what are the scenarios that are happening? What are you eating? So if you keep a diary for a week, even or just 7 days, can help the doctor to be able to, oh, okay, I can see that maybe it's around, you know, the time of day, or it could be your nutrition or whatever that is. So it's the same with to do with your mental health. Like, your thoughts have patterns. And once you're able to see, even if it is 3 days, 5 days, like, doesn't have to be 10 weeks, but at least consecutive days, or at least the times when they're triggered, you write them down. It helps us to be able to help you identify, oh, okay, this event might be happening and it's making you feel this. And then we can, the line of questioning is a lot quicker than if you're starting from scratch, which is absolutely fine. We can do it the same way. But I always say, even for yourself, if you notice, oh, I'm saying I'm feeling frustrated at X. And then on Thursday, I'm saying I'm feeling frustrated at the same person. And then on Monday, you're saying I'm feeling frustrated about the same person. Even for you, you're going to see the repetition to be like, maybe there's something in this, and you naturally can question it yourself. So I feel like journaling is always a go-to for sure. And then finally, it's just reaching out to someone that you trust, reaching out to a professional if you don't have anyone, you know, in your immediate circle or, you know, in your network that you can't trust and doesn't feel completely safe. Because you need someone that's non-judgmental. You need someone that doesn't, regardless of what you say to them, you don't feel that they're going to judge you.
Yeah.
Right? So trained people, of course, help because you're trained to do that. However, there are people that you probably have in your circle and your network that are naturally good listeners and they're just there to kind of listen and reach out to them. Ask them, have you got a minute? Have you got 5 minutes? Have you got 30 minutes for a chat? Because something's really been playing on my mind. And I could do with just someone listening. And I think it's important to instruct the person, especially if they're not a trained professional, what it is you want them to do. Because a lot of the time, when you go to someone and you're like, I need to chat, immediately the person that you're going to is going to want to help you. They're going to want to find a solution. They're going to want to problem solve. And that's not what you're looking for. Unless that is what you're looking for. But if you're looking for someone just to listen, tell them all I need you to do is just be a listening ear. And then they feel relaxed about how they can therefore help you, because listening is so powerful and there's so much power in silence of the other person just taking it all in for you.
Yeah. I think that's really helpful. I'm assuming there are other things in general that will help. So you've talked about nutrition, you've talked about sleeping well, you've talked about movement, getting outside, all of that kind of stuff. Those are things that we would recommend that as leaders you're looking at anyway to show up as you're in your kind of best state in the workplace. But I suppose they're also particularly important when it comes to stress and anxiety.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, again, anxiety, and stress is all in the body. Like, that's the thing, because a lot of the time we think we've got to think our way out of feeling anxious. And really, you have to change your physical state in order for you to feel better, because, again, you feel anxious and feelings are in the body. So definitely nutrition, like caffeine is one thing that does not help with anxiety and stress. Like, it only exacerbates it more. Lack of water, like kind of the basics that, most people kind of know, like not too much sugar, getting enough sleep, moving, doing those kind of, being more mindful if you can. And I know meditation is really a big thing now, like trying to just find little pockets of just pausing. I like to use it as pause, because meditation can sound a bit intimidating. Like you got to be a monk.
Some people think it's a bit woo.
But just practice pausing. I like to put it in that term, to be like, just pause for a minute. You know what I mean? Just take a minute, and you don't even have to be like not thinking about anything. You could be washing up. You could just be gazing. You could, like, so many little things that kind of help you to kind of, what I call it is increase your emotional capacity. So all those little moments you're just adding to your cup. So then when it's time for you to spill out, especially as a leader, you're constantly pouring, you have more to pour, by just gaining back those minutes by pausing every, could be every 30 minutes. You take a 2-minute gaze or whatever, what I mean, not so regimented, but you're just more aware of these things, and you therefore actively looking for okay, I'm going to pause here, or I'm going to take a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break or whatever that is. So, I think the core, like nutrition stuff, absolutely. Movement, absolutely. Mindful pauses, Absolutely. And of course, like you can be more structured, more routines. Like, the time management stuff is really good too.
Mm.
But I would always go with the change your physical state first, and then do the strategies that can help you manage your time better and things like that. And most people do the opposite way around, and they go to time management and then figure out and wonder why it's not working or sticking. And it's more stressful, if anything.
Yeah.
Because you haven't moved the emotion in your body and you haven't released it anywhere.
Yeah, that's really important. We've talked a lot about, I suppose, the individual leader and their own responsibilities to themselves and to others. But if we look more broadly at the organisational view and perspective, a lot of organisations and HR departments often focus on this need to build resilience, and perhaps ignore some of the other things. And they believe that that's the answer that's going to solve the kind of cultural issues that they have in their organisation. What's your view on the role of the organisation, and what can they be doing to help leaders and individuals with anxiety?
I think it's such a broad question, isn't it? It's such a big,
sorry.
not even the question I'm thinking about.
We could have a whole other episode on that, I know.
It's such a big, meaty question. Okay, so I think that from an organizational perspective, I think that, especially if they've got a cultural issue, I think that seeing everyone as an individual, which could be quite difficult, but seeing everyone as an individual is probably the first thing that's going to help. Because when people are in a group and they just feel like a number or just staff, they immediately feel unimportant, not significant, not feeling like their needs matter or even have been paid attention to. So I feel like when you pay attention, it's like a child. Like when you pay attention to a child and you stop ignoring them, they actually behave better. Like you get to understand what the problem is. You know what their emotional issues are. You know what their significant issues are. You know what their triggers are. All of those things. And it's very similar, like us adults are really children, like walking around in the world. But again, especially in organizations, you realize that there's so many different, personalities, dynamics, and in the workforce, but everybody is an individual. And I think if organizations are able to, from the top down, start to treat everyone as much as they can, because obviously I know that some places have hundreds and hundreds of staff members, but then they have managers, right? That's the structure of the organization. And there's a reason for that. So that it trickles down from the top down that, well, each staff member matters. And say that's even like a value of theirs. Do you know what I mean? Like everybody matters. How do you demonstrate that? Through the way you are managing those people, how you're having those, different types of conversations with them, different types of opportunities to bring them together, to get them to be able to voice how they're feeling, to be able to express themselves, especially if it's a cultural thing. People have a lot to say. They feel a lot. And most people, when it comes to culture, I believe that, especially because it's of the people, if they don't feel heard, that's when things start going all over the place. And you know what I mean? Morale starts to decline, and all of those things averagely is based on people feeling that their needs are not met. And the most basic need that any human being feels and wants is to be heard. They just want to be heard and listened to. And therefore, just by that, makes them feel more important, and it's more personal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So less let's put on a resilience course,
Yeah.
and more listening would be
Yeah.
a better spend of money.
Absolutely.
No offense to any trainers of resilience courses.
No, 100%. I actually went on a resilience course a few weeks ago. It was a great course. I think it was quite good. But the difference is I chose to go on it because it was an option.
Yeah.
Not that I was
Yeah.
forced to. And I think that's the
Yeah.
difference. I had a choice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I chose to do it. And like, let's learn a little bit more. And resilience is great when it's used in the right context. But if it's used as a plaster, it's a problem.
Yeah, completely agree. So we're getting to the end of our time together. My final question that I ask everyone on the show is, what's your one tip or piece of advice that you'd want every leader to pay attention to?
I would say, especially I'm an emotions person. So when it comes, it's like pay attention to how you're feeling. Like that's the biggest tip that I can say, and it can do wonders if you pay attention to how you're feeling and to label it correctly. Because a lot of the time what I find, especially in the beginning of the conversation, we spoke about stress and anxiety and how overused those terms are, and people don't even know what they are anymore. When it's like, instead of using anxiety, you could use nervous. Instead of using anxiety, you could use the word disappointed, right? So when you are labeling your emotions correctly, then it's a better way to communicate with people, and therefore people actually truly know how you're feeling rather than the blanket term, you know, I'm feeling stressed, I'm okay, that's the worst. I'm okay, I'm fine. What is okay and what is fine? Like, that's not an emotion that I understand. So I would say pay attention to your feelings and label them correctly. And if you don't know, because again, we have quite limited vocabulary when it comes to emotion, go on any Google, Pinterest, whatever, and just type in wheel of emotion. Gives you so many more words to use. And it's such a great tool, even for your team, as well as yourself as a leader. 100%. So much better. And you'll realize how much more you can communicate with people more effectively just by labeling your emotions more clearly.
Yeah. And I'd love that as a piece of advice. My I suppose addendum to that would be, if someone shares their feelings to you, rather than you assume you know what that means, you could ask them, you could make the point, I know what nervousness means for me, but what does that mean for you?
Absolutely. It's a conversation starter.
Dig into it.
Connect with them, you know what I mean? Like, it really does help. Because as humans, we're emotional beings. Despite the fact that many people like to be like, I don't have emotions, I don't show them, like you do. You absolutely do. And the people that think they have less emotions are the ones that have the most. Like, most of the time. They just work harder at
no emotion. No emotion is emotion. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been really eye-opening, actually. If people want to get in touch with you, follow what you do, just give you some feedback, kind of, if they've learnt from this episode, how best can they connect with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. So if you just type in Ashleigh Frater, I'll come up straight away. So that's kind of where I hang out most days, to be fair. And the other place is just on my email, which I can send over to you, Lee, anyway. And you can link it. So if you have anything to say, please do email me or hit me up on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And I'll put all the links and everything in the show notes for people.
Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and let me know what you thought on LinkedIn. You can find me at Lee Griffith. I'll be back with the next episode in 2 weeks' time. So in the meantime, sign up to my newsletter at sundayskies.com for monthly insights on how else you can lead with impact. Until next time.